Now, so how is Africa prepared for a possible spike in oil prices, as well as a glaring shortage following that latest development? Now in studio, I have Crystal Adero-Okudo, who is an energy economist and a managing partner at Catalyst Capital LLC. She's also a transaction advisor focused exclusively on Africa's renewable energy sector. Many thanks for making time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, now this is an unfortunate turn of events, the Saudi oil attacks. But in terms of the clawback as an African continent, what are we looking at in terms of the oil prices and the disruption, as well as we understand they accounted for 5% of the world supply?
Exactly. This is a huge blow to the energy sector in general. Here in Africa, most African nations are net importers of oil. So we're all going to be extremely significantly affected by this explosion that happened. That's 5% of global oil exports that have been affected. Here in Kenya, we're net importers of oil. And we are going to experience, various short-term effects as well as some longer-term effects as well.
Okay.
Within the short term, we are going to see rising inflation if it hasn't already begun. Oil price affects so much more than the common Wananchi really can perceive. But we import the oil. If we're importing it at a higher price, obviously that affects gasoline prices. And gasoline prices are something that are within several value chains. The food that we eat, transport sector, consumer goods. These are all things that are going to be infected by the spike in gasoline prices. And so we're going to experience inflation. All
right. Now, inflation is definite. But in terms of the countries that might not have proper oil reserves, especially in Africa, what should they be thinking about right now? Because this might tend to affect the supply of crude oil and such components, especially, the much needed components in Africa. What should we look at?
Yes, so I would say that definitely, any nation that's interested in, maintaining its sovereignty going forward should carefully consider, maintaining some oil and gas reserves of its own.
All right.
Because that's a really important factor and a great way to kind of cushion the shock from global events such as this one. And nobody saw this coming. There has never been a drone strike on an oil facility before. So even after Saudi Arabia has recovered, I think that it's still in the best interest of nations such as Kenya that don't have oil and gas reserves to make sure that there's at least some barrels, that we have in case of emergencies.
All right. Now, Africa is a continent. We have countries, a couple of countries, Nigeria, one of them, that produce oil in quite large quantities. And not forgetting Kenya, we just had our first haul leaving the country, going to the overseas market. But for countries that provide oil, will this be a win for them in terms of the surge in oil prices? How exactly are we looking at this? Yeah.
Right. Well, it'll definitely be a win for them within the short term. Within the long term, I think that Saudi Arabia is going to recover, the 5% export loss that they're experiencing. But in the short term, countries such as Nigeria and Angola are going to benefit from higher oil prices. And they're also a part of OPEC. OPEC is the regulator for oil price. And OPEC also regulates quantities that countries can export. So at the moment, countries such as Nigeria might have their quotas raised by OPEC in order to cushion the loss of barrels from Saudi Arabia. And, this higher export quota will also be economically beneficial for them.
All right. Now, as I was perusing through some of the keen issues that actually are highlighted after this particular attack, we've never seen a supply of oil disruption and a price response like this in the oil market in the near future, in the near past rather. Now, in terms of political risk premiums, which are sort of something that has been ongoing in the oil market agenda, this conversation needs to continue. But what exactly do we mean by political risk premiums, and what effect might they have on the price and the supply of oil?
Right. So, yeah, a catastrophe such as this one affects not just the consumer, but it also affects investments. And political risk premiums are, the amount that an investor would pay in order to, insure their project politically. And this is something that's going to go up now that this huge catastrophe has happened.
Yeah, true.
And so investors looking to secure political risk guarantees are going to have to dish out a lot more in order to have their projects covered politically.
So that's basically, now in terms of the clawback in terms of oil supply and the demand as well. You mentioned something about OPEC and how they make sure that, in terms of the exports a country has, they actually regulate it, if I got you correctly. Now, moving forward, I know there might be countries that might be told to increase their supply, if I'm not wrong, but will that be enough to cushion? Will there be a shortfall that is felt across the global market, not just in the African market as well, following this particular attack? Now, I know the attack might lead to increase in prices and whatnot, but in terms of the oil supply, might this be something that might, lead African countries to hiking prices, which might affect the common mwananchi as well? What exactly are we looking at?
Well, this is something that'll take us a while to really understand. And I think that there will be a lot more clarity once Saudi Arabia is able to really clarify the extent of damage and how long it's going to take to recover from that damage. Right. Because within the short term, what you're estimating is absolutely correct. There will be higher quotas of exports for some African countries, Nigeria, Angola, as well as other emerging markets as well. This is something that's just in the short term for now. I think OPEC itself is also waiting to really understand, how soon Saudi Arabia is going to be able to, recover what they've lost.
All right. Now, as we conclude, kindly demystify for us the link between, oil prices and faster or higher inflation, as well as slower global growth. I mean, many people say that, oil affects everything, from the cars we use, automobiles, everything. So in terms of the inflation and the slow global growth, how exactly are these interlinked?
Right. So oil really touches on almost every aspect of life, and this is why it's such a huge geopolitical issue as well. Yeah. That's what makes the oil industry unique. Going forward, we can definitely project that there's going to be higher inflation. And higher inflation, of course, impedes growth. When services, goods, are more expensive, it makes it a lot more difficult for, Wananchi to prosper and to build their businesses and, to trade affordably. So this really is an event that has very far-reaching impact. And I believe it's going to be felt within the short term, but still within the long term basis. Even after Saudi Arabia has recovered, there's still a lot of apprehensiveness that this event has caused. How secure are our national, assets going forward if they can be destroyed by drone strikes?
Oh, very true. Now, in terms of how Africa should prepare for the possible spike, or rather the spike that is coming in oil prices, as well as, maybe a possible shortage following that latest development, how should we prepare ourselves?
Here in Africa, I mean, it comes down to some personal preparation, first of all.
All right.
I think that, you know, everyone should be a little bit cognizant of the fact that there will be some inflation going forward, and we need to plan out, you know, the things that we usually do, just so that we know that, you know, it'll be a lot more costly to get those things done. But on a national level, I would love to see the government develop a preparedness plan for the next time an event like this occurs, because this is something that really should be managed on a national level. You know, if we had oil and gas reserves, we would be able to cushion the financial blow from this event. You know, countries like the US and Japan, they have reserves, and they're going to use that to kind of cushion the prices within their own markets. And they've also offered to release some of their reserves to cushion prices within the global market. But there's only so much that they're going to be able to do. I think that they're going to be able to cover their own countries. And here in Africa, we should develop plans as well to be able to do the same.
Yeah, so in short, we should definitely prepare for a spike in oil prices, and maybe if it actually gets to us and we don't have reserves, a shortage as well.
Yes, a shortage as well. There's also, you know, financial mechanisms, you know, that we can utilize in order to kind of help cushion this shock. You know, there's oil price hedging, where we can purchase barrels in the future based on the current price.
All right.
And this is something that the central bank will have to lead, so that we can, you know, kind of secure our future supply against any price hikes that will continue to occur.
All right, many thanks. Crystal Adera Okudo, who's an energy economist and a managing partner at Catalyst Capital LLC. Thank you so much for your contribution on the show.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
All right. Now, definitely something to anticipate right there in terms of the blowback in the continent Africa, as well as the cushioning